Arlington, Virginia, September 11, 2001. An aircraft thundered through the skies prior to the large explosion at the Pentagon. Many people believe this aircraft caused the explosion at the Pentagon. But did it? According to data provided by the US government claimed to be from the black box of the reported aircraft, American Airlines Flight 77 did not cause the damage at the Pentagon on that fateful day. Pilots for Truth provided detailed analysis of this data in Pandora's Black Box, Chapter 2, Flight of American 77. U.S. government agencies refused to comment. Citizen investigation team, during their extensive research, filmed independent witness statements on location who state the aircraft approached from the north of a Citgo gas station, making the physical damage observed at the Pentagon irreconcilable with the northern path as witnessed. During their research, CIT wondered if a south path was even possible as reported by the government. A Virginia Department of Transportation antenna appears to extend into the south flight path if in fact American 77 were on the southern approach as required by the government story. Arlington topography is also unique in that the Pentagon sits at the bottom of a hill. Due to topography and this obstacle at the top, they asked Pilots for Truth to figure out if American 77, a 757, could even perform the maneuver required to clear the top of the VDOT antenna, hit the light poles, reportedly struck on Washington Boulevard, and still pull out of this dive to be level with the lawn as seen in the infamous 5 frames DoD video. Pilots for Truth published an article based on the government story and data for American 77 final leg, with calculations that showed if American 77 were on the south path as required by the government story, and we hypothetically lowered the altitude from 699 feet above sea level, as provided and produced by the NTSB, to the top of the VDOT antenna and continued trends, that it was impossible for this aircraft to pull out of the dive at the light poles and be level across the lawn as seen in the DoD 5 frames video. After publishing the article showing that this hypothetical scenario would be impossible based on the government story and data, Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Lottis, core member of Pilots for 9/11 Truth, alerted us that the calculations were not accurate based on the premise of the original article. We started to review our article and calculations. Of course, we came under harsh criticism for such a mistake. Some critics used formulas which is based on a one-dimensional problem such as a car decelerating over a distance. This formula is completely incompatible with the two-dimensional problem we are addressing. An online calculator was offered for the layman to input data so they can see for themselves how Pilots for Truth were in error. Unfortunately, the calculator reference is based on a one-dimensional problem such as the loads a car would experience during deceleration along a highway, not for an aircraft pulling out of a dive in an arc. This was pointed out several times, but it appears the critics would rather plug their ears. In other words, one-dimensional means they were using only one velocity vector, the vertical vector. We need to account for a horizontal velocity as well, the total velocity vector. With the total velocity vector, we can figure out the g-load required to pull out of this dive along the arc. A parabola formula was also offered in response to our article. This in fact makes the most sense and takes into account the two velocity vectors involved for such a problem. Unfortunately for this scenario, it wasn't consistent with the original premise of our article or the data provided by the government. Critics made the assumption that there isn't any insight into aircraft altitude, vertical speed, or attitude. This assumption is false, and the NTSB has produced and provided such data based on what the NTSB claims is from the black box of American 77. Based on these initial false assumptions, the parabolic formula derived G-loading required for the least challenging scenario is 1.62 Gs during the entire duration, from the top of the VDOT antenna to being level across the lawn without taking into account the linear trends provided by the NTSB. This diagram also shows the most challenging scenario of a sustained 4G pull from the FDR altitude above the VDOT antenna through to being level across the lawn. Several conclusions were made based on this parabolic response to our article, which are also completely false.
Based on these calculations, there is absolutely no case to be made that 1. The obstacles are inconsistent with the impact of Flight 77. 2. The FDR is inconsistent with the impact of Flight 77. Or 3. The FDR data is inconsistent with the impacts to the obstacles themselves.
The claim was made that there is absolutely no case in which the FDR is inconsistent with these figures derived from a parabolic formula, obstacles, or the impact itself. One look at the CSV file provided by the NTSB will readily prove these conclusions false for anyone who takes the time to study the information provided by the NTSB, in which the NTSB claims is based on the FDR data from American 77. The least challenging claim states that the aircraft needs 1.62 Gs for a 4-second duration. The highest Gs recorded in the flight data recorder according to the NTSB is 1.75 Gs. However, this was for an eighth of a second. Averaging the G load over the 4-second duration using the CSV file figures as provided and produced by the NTSB, one notes 1.17 Gs, not 1.62 as those who make excuses for the government story would like you to believe, and certainly not 4 Gs as required according to the altitude plotted by the NTSB. The conclusions posed demonstrate complete deception on the part of those who would make excuses for the government story, as 4 Gs is nowhere to be found within the data produced by the NTSB, let alone 4-second duration as being consistent with the FDR data. The other conclusions and claims implying that the flight data recorder is consistent with impact at Pentagon or obstacles, simple analysis of the animation and CSV file altitude as produced and provided by the NTSB will readily prove such claims false. We are not sure why one would make such a claim when it is so apparent to be false if one takes a small amount of time to look at the flight data recorder data as provided by the NTSB. Calculations and figures derived by critics in response to our original article are in no way consistent with the flight data information provided by the NTSB. With that said, the parabola scenario does present a possible descent through obstacle and topography, albeit not consistent with the FDR trends. Our scene in Pandora's Black Box, Chapter 2, based on vertical speed, puts this problem into context. Based on the FDR altitude provided by the NTSB, we know the aircraft was too high to cause any of the observed damage at the Pentagon. Now we will lower the aircraft to the top of the VDOT antenna. Using the same trends, we will ask, can this aircraft pull level at pole 1 to be level across the lawn as seen in the DoD video, as intended for our original article? In order to be as accurate as possible, we built a scale model of the Arlington area, complete with obstacles, topography, scale structures, and vehicles. Scale presentation is available at the end of this video. The scale for this presentation is 1 centimeter equals 100 feet. In Pilots for 9/11 Truth Presents Volume 2, we explore the possibilities regarding pitch and bank transitioning to the south path. Placing the aircraft on the south path, lowered from the FDR altitude of 699 feet above sea level, at this point in space, to the top of the VDOT antenna, we can examine the pull-up needed at pole 1 and measure the radius using a 3-point arc radius tool provided with this 3D animation software program. Remember, the scale of this presentation is 100 feet equals 1 centimeter box. To get an idea of how we demonstrate this with 3D software, we switch to an orthogonal view. An orthogonal view is different than a perspective view in that it eliminates the effective distance from a viewpoint. Therefore, we can accurately determine radius of an arc and precisely draw an arc based on the pull-up needed in this view. Here is the arc drawn in the orthogonal view. We will remove the topography and obstacles in order to get a better view of the arc drawn. Again, we will demonstrate the accuracy of the scale and topography at the end of this presentation. The radius of this arc is 20.85 centimeters. But remember, the scale of this presentation is 1 centimeter equals 100 feet. So we need to multiply 100 to 20.85, and we get a radius of 2,085 feet. With the radius, we can use a simple formula required for measuring acceleration as a equals v squared over r. This is the proper formula to use for such a problem. Using the velocity as provided by the NTSB for both scenarios equals 781 feet per second, we need to square that, divided by 2085 equals 292 feet per second squared. To figure out G load, we need to divide 292.2 by 32 feet per second squared. G-force calculation for this pull-up equals 9.14 Gs. We also need to add 1 G for Earth's gravity for a total of 10.14 Gs required. Transport category aircraft are limited to 2.5 positive Gs. Although a 757 could perhaps withstand more G-forces than 2.5, it's highly unlikely it could withstand more than 5 or 6. Remember, this calculation is for the least challenging pull. If we hypothetically lowered the aircraft altitude from the NTSB plotted altitude to the lower height of the VDOT antenna. As we can see, G-loads required to pull out of a dive from the top of the VDOT antenna are impossible for a 757. It is off the charts if we account for altitude as plotted and produced by the NTSB. Placing the aircraft at the FDR altitude, the most challenging pull, we can measure the radius of the arc needed to pull out of such a dive. Again, we switch to the orthogonal view for accurate measurements, and we get a radius of 576.9 feet. Plugging that radius into the same formula and adding 1 G for Earth's gravity, we get 34 Gs. Impossible. This is the proper way to determine G-loads in a two-dimensional problem such as aircraft pulling out of a dive. Some have argued and speculated that the aircraft alleged to have struck the Pentagon was not level across the lawn as seen in the DoD 5 frames video, and therefore would not require as many Gs to pull out of the dive to be level. If the aircraft was in fact in some sort of residual dive and impact, there certainly would have been some type of foundation damage. Pilots for 9/11 Truth and Citizen Investigation Team have put together an article detailing the lack of foundation damage found at the Pentagon. These pictures prove that if in fact an object struck the Pentagon, it would have to be level. But as we know, it's impossible for a 757 to have negotiated the Arlington topography and obstacles based on the FDR data provided by the US government. Others have argued that the flight data recorder must be missing its final seconds due to the fact it shows too high and not enough Gs to pull out of such a dive. We put the following clip together in February of 2008 to address such concerns. Some have argued that the flight data recorder information stopped recording 6 seconds from the Pentagon wall. The reason they argue this is to justify the fact that the flight data recorder shows too high to hit the light poles and too high to hit the Pentagon if the trends are continued. The flight data recorder information based on the raw file decode that we did shows latitude longitude position at this point. That's the very last point that it shows. And some argue that this is the point where all the data ends, which would explain why the aircraft shows too high. However, this positional data is based on what's called an inertial navigation system. The inertial navigation system is a self-contained unit on the aircraft based on accelerometers, which calculate the position of the aircraft as it flies. The accelerometers are prone to error. The inertial navigation system itself are prone to errors, especially when the aircraft is doing extreme maneuvering, accelerating rapidly, and so forth. It's very possible that during the 330-degree maneuver and the rapid acceleration during this dive caused the INS system to crash at this point. So we must see if there is any other data within the flight data recorder that shows a more accurate position. As a matter of fact, there is. The CSV file that was provided to us by the National Transportation Safety Board, the original file, not the raw file, the original file that we're supposed to have, that was provided to us and produced by professionals at the NTSB for public distribution through the Freedom of Information Act, shows what's called DME, or distance measuring equipment. It's not a self-contained unit. It's based on a ground facility and a receiver in the aircraft. And the ground facility was DCA VOR, which is a radio beacon basically on the ground. And it shows the distance from that facility at the last point at 1.5 nautical miles, or 1.5 DME, at 09:37:43. The NTSB reports the impact time at 09:37:45. So that's 2 seconds prior to impact when this was recorded. So what we need to do now is determine that position of 1.5 DME. The 1.5 DME was recorded off of DCA VOR, which is Reagan National, and here's the radio beacon, the VOR on the field that it was recorded from. We'll go out to 1.5 nautical miles, roughly on the south flight path. And we'll measure the distance in feet from the impact hole to get the time based on speed. 2,695 feet it shows from the impact hole. Now remember, this aircraft, based on the files that the NTSB gave us, this aircraft recorded 1.5 DME at 2 seconds from the wall. Calculating its distance based on speed, we can get the time. 781, roughly 3.5 seconds from the wall. So that's too far. However, if we look at the northern approach, we'll put this back into nautical miles. Go to 1.5 DME. Go back to feet. 2 seconds represents roughly 1,600 feet. That is a lot closer. So the DME itself even reflects the northern approach. So what does this mean? It means that it's impossible that all the data stopped recording at this point. It's impossible to have recorded even northern or southern approach at 1.5 DME if all data stopped here. So now that we have established that it's impossible this aircraft stopped recording at the last latitude-longitude position, we'll move on to the next argument. The next argument states that the aircraft stopped recording at 1.5 nautical miles. Well, we already know that the NTSB places it 2 seconds prior to impact. So this is too far away. However, for argument's sake, let's say that the altitude was recorded at this point, which we know it wasn't. But we'll say it is, and we'll see if it's still too high at this point. We know that the altitude at this point, based on argument's sake, is 273 feet above the ground based on the radar altimeter. The ground elevation for this point is 120 feet plus 273 equals almost 400 feet, 393. We know that the light poles in the elevation here, top of pole number 1, is roughly 80 feet. So that's 313 feet. This aircraft has to descend 313 feet within this distance. Let's see how long it takes to travel this distance based on the speed. We'll go back to feet. Divided by 781 equals 2.24 seconds, 2.125 seconds. It has to drop 313 feet. 313 divided by 2.25 equals it's dropping. It has to have a linear descent rate of 139 feet per second times 60 to get feet per minute. 8,346 feet per minute descent dive, which is a rapid dive, to get from this position just to the top of pole number 1, and then level out to be level with the lawn, as seen in the 5 frames DoD video. That's impossible. So the argument that the aircraft radar altitude was recorded at 1.5 DME off of DCA VOR is pure bunk. So to sum up, the NTSB reports the time of impact at 09:37:45. The NTSB shows the end of data at 09:37:44. Too high to hit the light poles when we adjust for the pressure altitude to the local pressure, as seen in Pandora's Black Box, Chapter 2, Flight of American 77, shows it directly above the highway. Too high to hit the light poles, and if trends continue, too high to hit the Pentagon. Keep in mind this data was provided by the NTSB. They plotted it at this position. They plotted the time. The professionals at the NTSB produced this information. They refused to comment. Others like to make excuses of where this altitude and the data stopped. It did not stop here, we know that, because it recorded points here. If it did stop here, it's still too high to have hit pole number 1 and level out with the lawn, as seen in the DoD 5 frames video. So no matter how you slice it, the flight data recorder information does not support the government story. The NTSB, the FBI, they refuse to comment. That should highly concern everybody out there, including pilots. Citizen Investigation Team. A team of ordinary citizens who felt the story they had been told about the Pentagon attack was perhaps not the whole truth. Craig Ranke and Aldo Marquez traveled to Arlington to find out more. They didn't realize they would be uncovering more than they anticipated. CIT traveled to Arlington in search of facts, no matter where it led. They discovered, based on multiple independently corroborated witness statements, that the aircraft which thundered through the skies of Arlington on the morning of September 11th had an approach different than what they had been told by government reports. We reconstructed 3D animation viewpoints for each of these witnesses and the respective northern or southern approach to observe which approach the witnesses more accurately describe, or if they could be mistaken. During CIT's first trip to Arlington, they met the Sitco station manager, who had informed them one of the employees saw the aircraft on the morning of September 11th, however on a path opposite the physical damage. CIT was able to get a hold of Robert Tercios and set up a meeting to interview him on location. This was their experience.
So I was saying, I had just come out to do the pump maintenance that morning, taking out the old water, replacing the paper towels, whatnot. I had my cart over here, and when I heard the loud engine sound, we normally get flybys from the airplanes, but it was louder than that. So I started looking where it was coming from. So around, and I saw the airplane come down here over the tree.
Okay, let's see where you say it was coming down. We're on the south side of the Sitco station. Robert says he saw it come down over here on the north side. Is that right, Robert?
That's correct. It was to my I saw it come right over the top of that tree there, next to the corner of the canopy. It seemed to be very, very low to the ground. I thought it was going to hit the floor, the street here, the ramp. But so I ran out here to this mound to see if I could see what was going to happen.
So let's go over there.
It was not completed as you see it now.
Right.
It was a little bit shorter.
Right.
So I could see a little bit more than now. But
in fact, let's go up on the mountain so we can get a better view of what you actually saw. Okay. So there we go. That's the Pentagon.
Okay.
Pretty close view of where the impact point was. Now, Robert, when you ran up to the mound, you saw the plane fly through between these two trees. What happened after that?
Well, as I say, what I saw was a gray plane. I couldn't really exactly tell what it was. I mean, it was, couldn't tell the markings on the side of it. Just.
Did you see any markings at all?
No, I don't remember seeing any markings. It was so, kind of quick, maybe 2 seconds when I saw just swoop down here, and I tried to follow it, and I saw it lift up a little bit to get over.
The official story says that the plane came on the south side of the Sitco and hit the light poles and then went on to the Pentagon. Robert, how certain are you that the plane came on the north side of the station as opposed to the south side?
I am 100% sure that what I saw is the plane come out from this corner of the canopy over this side of the canopy. I saw it pick up a little bit.
Oh, okay.
I saw the back side from that. I did not see any markings on that side by that.
Right, I see. So you saw it, when you ran up to the mountains when you saw it pick up a bit?
Yes.
Okay. But you're, without a doubt, it was on this side of the station, on the north side of the station.
I'm certain that it was on this side of the station.
Okay.
Robert describes the plane on a path which conflicts with the physical damage. He describes the plane as being on the north side of his place of employment, the former Sitco gas station, and pulling up. Here's a reconstruction of what Robert describes. Data and physical damage reports supplied by the government require the aircraft to approach the Pentagon south of the Sitco gas station. Although, as seen in Volume 2, the heading data causes the aircraft to impact the VDOT cam pole and misses light pole number 2, conflicting with reported events. When incorporating pitch and roll working outwards from the Pentagon, the aircraft misses all reported physical damage. This is the path required to line up with the physical damage as observed from Robert's point of view. As you can see, this is nothing like what Robert has described. Some have argued at this point in time that Robert could have been mistaken since it was several years ago this event took place. A valid argument since it is only one person describing such a conflicting path. But is it only one? While in Arlington, CIT was lucky enough to be able to interview Sergeant Lagasse and Brooks, both Pentagon police officers. Lagasse and Brooks corroborate Robert's description of the aircraft being on the north side of the Sitco gas station. Here is what Sergeant Lagasse describes interviewed in the exact spot he was on September 11th.
It was heading from left to right. Came from FOB2 area.
So you're saying it was it came from to the north side of the Navy Annex, even?
Yes. Now
Okay.
what it did before those transformers, I don't know, because that's the first place I really saw it was right there. But it was not coming towards me. It was coming from left to right, or from east or from west to east, heading into the building that way. So what it did before that point, who knows? I didn't see it.
Now, how long was the period from when you first saw the plane as to when it impacted the Pentagon?
I mean, it's right there. I'm looking at it that fast. I mean, probably half a second.
Half a second?
Look, I mean, it's here. 1001, 1000, maybe a second and a half. That's here to there. I mean, it's going as fast. If my hand's here, the aircraft, it's going that quick.
All right, now how sure are you that the plane was to the north, coming from the north side of the Navy Annex? You're saying it was pretty much between the Navy Annex and Arlington Cemetery? How
Right
certain are you of that?
100%. Bet my life on it.
What's the percentage chance that the plane was actually on the south side of the station?
0 chance. Is there less than 0%? So it would be impossible for me to have seen through the building, over the roof, to see the plane.
Lagasse bets his life on the fact he saw the aircraft pass to the north of him. Some have argued Lagasse also may have been mistaken due to the length of time between September 11th and the interview filmed on location. However, Lagasse was interviewed several years ago via email and described the same thing, that he was located at the starboard side of the aircraft as it passed. The starboard side is the right side of the aircraft. The only way the aircraft would be able to pass with Lagasse on the starboard side is if the aircraft were on the north path. Lagasse also reiterates the fact the aircraft couldn't have been on the south path due to the fact he has a building in his field of view, should the aircraft have actually been on the southern approach. This is what Lagasse would have seen if hypothetically the aircraft were on the south path. Lagasse does not describe anything like what you have just seen. Lagasse would have only been able to see the rear of the aircraft for a very short period of time if it were on the southern approach. And as Lagasse himself describes,
so it would be impossible for me to have seen through the building, over the roof, to see the plane.
it's impossible for Lagasse to be mistaken the south path for the north path. Sergeant Brooks was also interviewed on location the same day as Lagasse and Tercios. Sergeant Brooks also independently corroborates the claims made by Robert and Sergeant Lagasse. Brooks was a few yards west of the Citgo gas station when he witnessed the aircraft approach. Here is what he describes.
All right, Sergeant Brooks, you saw the plane on 9/11, isn't that right?
Correct, that's correct.
Okay, can you please give me basically just your story and what you saw on that day?
Sure.
Okay, Sergeant Brooks, so this is exactly where you were standing on when you got out of the car.
Right. During
Okay.
this point right here, we were able to see everything. We were able to see everything.
Right.
When that plane came descending across here.
Okay, so it came from up over here.
Correct. See where the trees are at?
Yeah.
Where the trees are at?
Uh-huh.
In the middle?
And it was descending.
Correct. It was descending. By then it had already been descending.
Okay,
it was
so
basically doing a straight line. A straight line towards the Pentagon.
This is a reconstruction of events based on Brooks' statements and observations. And if the aircraft were on the southern approach? Brooks is yet another witness who does not describe anything like this. The aircraft on the southern approach. Note that if the aircraft were on the southern approach, it would have passed almost directly above the Pentagon police officer. It is clear that Brooks is not mistaken regarding the location of flight path. Further west, Ed Paik witnessed the aircraft early that morning flying overhead.
so we saw it fly. It was coming from like
east way, coming from there to this way,
okay.
and then at the time feeling it looks like the almost hit my roof. The kind of the body side built over the building, and the wing is this way. Wing is the body, the stand over body here.
Okay. Body's there. Okay.
And the wing is the right wing is this way,
Maybe over the road.
over the road.
Oh, okay.
That's the direction.
I see. And so you're saying it was just barely over the buildings. That's how high it was?
Yeah.
This is a reconstruction of what Ed describes. Note the aircraft continues over the Navy Annex. If the aircraft were on the south path, as required by the government story, physical damage, and data, this is what Ed would have seen from his position. Ed does not describe anything as such. CIT returned home with such footage and distributed it to the public. They came under harsh criticism for such findings. Many people attacked CIT for what amounts to filming witnesses on location and reporting to the public what they said. They were accused of coaching, editing, spin, the list goes on. Yet these same people were invited to go to Arlington themselves to interview the same witnesses with their own resources as did CIT. For some reason, these people would rather argue on the internet than go to Arlington. More importantly, the witnesses themselves stand by the north side approach to this day and have not accused CIT of misrepresenting their claims. Indeed, the witnesses are what make this independent evidence 100% verifiable and ultimately force CIT to maintain a perfect standard of honest reporting, since any misrepresentation would easily be discovered. The validation did not stop there. CIT returned to Arlington after reading statements released via Freedom of Information Act by the Center for Military History. They noticed more witnesses, Arlington National Cemetery workers, describing the northern approach. These are their independently confirmed statements as reported by CIT.
I looked up, looking in this direction, and I could see the plane over the corner of that the building there.
What building?
That would be the Naval Annex.
Navy Annex?
Yeah.
Now, did it look like it was directly over the Navy Annex, or was it farther to the left of it, or what would you say?
From what I seen, it was to the right of it.
To the right?
It was on this corner of it.
Oh, on the right corner?
Yeah. And where those corners, you can see the building in the background, which is the Sheraton
right
up there. It looked like it came over that, and then it looked like it was just over top of the Naval Annex on the right corner of it.
On the right corner?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And I said, hey, look, and they turned around and they looked, and then it was fastly approaching. It was quiet though, you couldn't hear it. And we were kind of stunned and knew we wanted to get out the way or something. It was headed. It appeared that it was coming right for us, actually. So we knew we wanted to get out of the way, but
you mean it was headed right towards the buildings, like?
Yeah, if it came off that end, it looked like it was just coming straight in this direction.
Oh, okay.
And maybe this guy's out of control, or maybe he's trying to fly, or it's out of control and he's coming in on us. Well, anyway, as he came closer, probably, I'm guessing maybe when he got to that point where that traffic light is, those vehicles at that traffic light, somewhere in there, you could see him kind of bank a little bit, kind of, I guess, lean to the right.
Well, hold on a second. I got a little model airplane. Let me get that. Hold on. So here's the plane. Kind of demonstrate how you saw it coming after it came up the Navy Annex. You said you saw it banking.
Yeah, it was on the Navy Annex. It was flat. It was just like it was on top of the roof, landing on the roof. It's just like it barely made it over the roof. And then when it got beyond that point and we started to scatter, it started to bank to the right, still coming forward. And that's when I and myself and Donald Carter decided, hey, let's get away from it.
Okay, so
that's
it was
where
right on top of the Navy Annex.
It was on top of the Navy Annex.
And it looked like it was headed towards...
It looked like it was headed towards this way, towards Arlington Cemetery. We were thinking it was going, oh man, it's on its way over this way. And it looked like, and the way the plane was coming...
Here, use this model plane.
So as this was coming across the building, it was about...
That's the Navy Annex, right?
This is the Navy Annex. And as it was coming across, it dropped down a little bit.
Towards you.
But angled.
Okay.
As it was dropping down more.
Would you say it was more on the north side of the gas station over here, or the south side on the far other end?
It was more on this side.
On the north side.
Right on this side.
Okay.
This is the reconstruction of the statements animated from their point of view. Coming over the Navy Annex almost directly towards them and banking. The Arlington National Cemetery workers do not describe the southern approach as seen here as required by the physical damage path and data. Although all these witnesses believe the aircraft impacted the building, the description of the flight path is in direct conflict with the physical damage path and southern approach required, yet perfectly corroborates all the witnesses at the gas station from a completely different perspective. Some have argued that they are all mistaken or lying regarding the placement of the plane in relation to the ground they were standing, yet are accurate in regards to the alleged impact of the plane, which was much further away and obscured by trees. Furthermore, these witnesses described how they were running away from the scene for their lives and were not paying attention to what the plane did after it passed them. While 3 of the witnesses were in the same area, the 4th, William Middleton, had yet another completely different perspective, and he also corroborates all other witnesses' placement of the plane on the north side of the Citgo gas station.
Look, damn, I didn't see him right here, dropping. From right up there, he came in between, what's that, the Hilton and Navy Annex, and he started dropping. It was coming, I don't know the name of this street here, but it leads to Henderson Hall.
You're talking about the street right here on the north side of the Navy Annex?
On the north side of the Navy Annex. It was coming straight down the middle of the street, and I wasn't what was going on. And as it come past me, it was dropping.
William Middleton is an important witness in the fact that if the aircraft were on the southern approach, as required by the physical damage and data, he wouldn't even have seen it. Like Legacy, who would have had a building in his line of sight, William would have had the Navy Annex blocking. Once again, fatally conflicting with the government story. Which brings us to Sean Boger. Sean was located at the heliport tower, which adds yet another perspective to the corroborating north side witnesses. He describes the aircraft as approaching over the Navy Annex and banking to his right of the Citgo gas station. Sean is an aviation professional whose job it is to watch planes for a living. Another expert and professionally qualified witness we refer to Terry Morin, a Marine aviator who worked at statements regarding the placement of the plane also 100% contradict the southern approach required by the physical damage path and data. Navy Annex. Terry was located in between the wings at the Annex when he claims to have heard and witnessed the aircraft directly above him and the during the last visit to Arlington. Terry explained he was in between the wings at the Annex when he first heard and saw the aircraft. He heard the noise bounce off the east wall and turned to see the belly of the aircraft overhead. Terry says he ran out from in between the wings view. The only way William Middleton could have seen this aircraft is if it were on a north path, wings, and ran backwards uphill to see the plane. Terry claims he was able to see the tail of the aircraft as the explosion occurred. Yet from his vantage point, this would be impossible if the plane were actually low and level on a southern approach, impacting the building at the bottom floor as reported by the ASCE. Terry was asked if the aircraft was on the southern side of Columbia Pike when it passed him, as required by the physical damage and headings provided by the National Transportation Safety Board. He flatly denied the southern approach and said that it was Terry said that if it were on the south path, he would have a clear view of the side of the aircraft, not the belly, and would have been able to immediately determine the airline. Terry reported he wasn't sure if it was an American Airlines aircraft. Terry Morin's statements support the north approach more than a southern. His statements directly conflict with the southern approaches required by the physical damage and NTSB heading data. It is also impossible for Terry to have seen the tail at the moment of explosion due to obstacles in topography because the Navy Annex is on top of a hill with a significant decline to the Pentagon, only allowing him to see the top floor of the building from the Navy Annex property. There is only one way Terry could have seen the tail that morning. We'll let the viewer decide. Directly over him, and therefore completely on the north side of Columbia Pike at his position. Unfortunately, Terry's position with a defense contractor would not allow him to give permission to CIT to release his statements, but certainly anyone willing to speak with him direct would be able to verify or refute these claims, and Terry would most definitely speak against us if his claims have been misrepresented. The northern approach is one continuous flight path and filmed from each witness location. Since we do not have any solid data such as airspeed, altitude, headings, and specific type aircraft for the northern approach, the flight path was constructed based on overall witness statements, which placed the aircraft north of the Citgo gas station, conflicting with reported physical damage and government-supplied data. The north approach is for illustration purposes only. The southern approach is based on data provided by the government agencies in the form of heading, pitch, airspeed, and vertical speed. Altitude was lowered from the NTSB plotted data to the top of the VDOT antenna, and trends continued from there, showing the impossible recovery from this dive for 757 due to obstacles in topography. The northern approach has been independently corroborated 13 times over to date. The northern path described by these witnesses is in direct conflict with the southern approach required for the physical damage. As shown, it's virtually impossible for these independent witnesses to mistake a southern approach for a northern approach based on their detailed statements. They certainly can't be ignored. Therefore, those who make excuses for the government story are forced to either write off this evidence to simultaneous mass hallucination, or to accuse all these people of lying as deliberate deep cover plans involved in a mass disinformation conspiracy. Why those who make excuses for the government story refuse to travel to Arlington to confront these witnesses and their statements, and instead prefer to argue day and night on the internet, only they can answer. Not a single independent witness can be found who places the plane on a southern approach. Reviewing CIT's breakdown of the media-reported 104 alleged impact witnesses, there has not been one witness who directly contradicts the north side approach as reported by all the independent witnesses discussed. Keeping in mind the black box data as provided and plotted by the NTSB also shows the aircraft too high for all physical damage, including that of the Pentagon, further contradicting the official story. The NTSB, FBI, they refuse to comment.
It does make city operations more efficient and less costly. And I think taxpayers should actually be pushing for this.
Let's go to a caller in Red Bank.
Pilots for 9/11 Truth are asked many times. American Airline Flight 77 didn't hit the Pentagon, but where did the plane and passengers go? We feel that this is an excellent question considering the mountain of conflicting evidence for the impact. Flight data recorder conflicts, a growing number of witnesses filmed on location describing the flight path conflicting with the government's data and reports. The fact that the aircraft parts were never positively identified for all 4 aircrafts combined, with a commission who is, quote, set up to based on obstacles and topography, the flight data recorder, and aircraft limitations. The attack on the Pentagon is impossible for a 757 as alleged by the US government. Positive identification has never been established for the parts found, nor have the records been kept by the NTSB or FBI. Many unpublished witnesses conflict with the government story regarding the flight path, and it is clear that we're not mistaken. The list of witnesses is growing thanks to the relentless efforts of the Citizen Investigation Team. Why hasn't Congress investigated such conflicts? Why was the 9/11 Commission set up to fail? Considering the fact that we went to Afghanistan after 9/11 to smoke out bin Laden, yet bin Laden isn't even charged as a suspect for 9/11 by the FBI? Combined with the fact that we all know that there's zero justification for the Iraq War, yet our own government tried to tie Iraq to the attacks on 9/11. Let's not overlook the fact that 9/11 is the catalyst for creation of the Patriot Act, Military Commission Act, illegal wiretaps, free speech zone, with an increasing police state arresting those who are responsible for our checks and balances. Our leaders said terrorists attacked us because they hated our freedom. Well, it appears that those who are attacking our freedom and sending Americans to die based on lies, deception, cover-ups, and crimes must be the real terrorists. Those who make excuses for such people, those who spend all their time attacking others, who question the government's story, attempting to character assassination, intentionally distort, spin, lie, and deceive to justify such policy in an attempt to cause confusion, sophism, and distraction from the truth, hopefully will rethink their position. After popular mechanics, the NTSB and the FBI refused to address or discuss such alarming evidence in conflict with the government story. We offered anonymous internet experts a chance to argue their points. These are people who spend their day and night behind a screen attacking anyone who questions the government story, including family members of the victims, first responders, and survivors. Not surprisingly, every single internet expert who makes the excuse for the government story behind their screen have declined debate. The list of reputable people with questions regarding 9/11 is growing. After all, 9/11 is the reason for everything happening in our world today, and the government isn't forthcoming with the answers. It is perhaps a good idea to find out exactly what happened. The enormous amount of conflicting reports regarding the events of 9/11 do not justify the current world we live in and the sacrifices everyone has to make, some more than others. There isn't any excuse.